I never imagined that an ordinary afternoon would change the rhythm of my life. It started so simply, almost innocently. I went next door, just as I had done many times before. My neighbor's house always felt familiar to me. We had exchanged smiles over the years, shared casual greetings, and sometimes even borrowed little things from each other. There was nothing unusual about stepping across that boundary. But on that day, something in the air felt different. Something unspoken lingered between the walls, and my heart began to beat faster without my permission. The door opened, and it was him who greeted me. My neighbor's husband. He had always been polite, always had a way of making people feel welcome, but today his eyes lingered on me just a little too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. And that small detail planted a seed of tension in my chest. He invited me in, his voice calm, casual, but the tone had a weight I couldn't ignore. The house was unusually quiet, filled only with the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. His wife wasn't home, and that realization settled heavily over me. For a moment, I considered turning back, excusing myself, but instead, I followed him. As I stepped inside, my senses sharpened. I noticed the faint smell of his cologne mixed with the warm aroma of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The curtains let in a soft light, and shadows danced lazily across the room. He walked a few steps ahead of me, and though his pace was casual, there was an undeniable purpose in the way he carried himself. I felt it. He wanted me to follow. We exchanged small talk at first, meaningless words that neither of us truly listened to. He asked how I'd been. I replied automatically, but underneath those shallow exchanges, there was an undercurrent, something far stronger, something neither of us dared to say out loud. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my scarf, and I noticed his gaze follow the motion, lingering in silence. And then, with a quiet confidence that made my breath catch, he turned to me and said, "Come with me." His words were not a request. They were a pull, magnetic, irresistible. For a second, I froze. My mind screamed at me to stop, to leave, to remember every rule I was about to break. But my feet disobeyed. My heart betrayed me. I followed him down the narrow hallway, each step echoing in my ears like a drumbeat. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. It was his room, the room that belonged to him and my neighbor. My pulse raced as I stepped inside, every sense heightened. The walls seemed to close in around me, the silence thick, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I glanced around, unsure where to look, unsure why I hadn't already left. He shut the door gently behind us, and the sound echoed like a secret sealing itself in. For the first time, we were completely alone, with no witnesses, no distractions, nothing to hide behind. I could feel the weight of his presence pressing closer, though he hadn't touched me yet. The tension was unbearable, the kind that makes the air feel too heavy to breathe. I stood there, caught between reason and impulse. My thoughts tangled with guilt, curiosity, and an undeniable longing I didn't want to admit. Why did I follow him? Why did I let myself step into this space, knowing what it meant? Yet even as my conscience tried to build walls, my heart tore them down, brick by brick. His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable, as though he was waiting for me to say something. But words failed me. My lips parted, yet nothing came out. I felt stripped of excuses, of logic, of everything that kept me grounded. For the first time, I realized that I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could never be undone. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I could walk away at any moment, that nothing had happened yet. But deep inside, I knew I was already too far gone. The door was closed, the silence was thick, and my heart was beating in a way it hadn't in years. Whatever was about to happen, I could no longer deny that I wanted to know. And so I stayed. The silence in that room was suffocating, yet intoxicating at the same time. I could hear the faint hum of the fan above us and the quickening rhythm of my own heartbeat. He didn't rush toward me, didn't make any sudden move. Instead, he stood close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from his body. His eyes lingered on me with a mixture of confidence and restraint, as though he already knew what I was thinking but was waiting for me to admit it myself. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to remind myself that this was wrong, that one step further would push me past a line I could never uncross. My conscience screamed for me to leave, to push open that door and never look back. But my body betrayed me. My feet remained rooted to the floor, and my hands tightened against themselves as though gripping invisible chains. He broke the silence first. His voice was calm, quiet, but it carried a weight that settled deep into my chest. "You know why you're here," he said, his words more statement than question. I opened my mouth to deny it, to protest, but the words never came. Instead, I looked down, avoiding his gaze, as if that would shield me from the truth. He stepped closer, closing the gap between us, and my heart stuttered. Every part of me was alert, trembling with anticipation I refused to name. When he spoke again, his tone softened, almost gentle. "You've felt it too, haven't you?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. I swallowed hard, torn between admitting it and holding on to the last thread of restraint I still had. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't lie. I had felt it, the tension, the pull, the forbidden spark that had been growing with every encounter, every glance, every casual word exchanged at the doorstep. Pretending otherwise felt useless now. My silence was answer enough. He smiled faintly, not triumphant, but knowing. I wanted to tell him to stop, to turn away, to leave me with my fragile sense of dignity intact. Yet when he lifted his hand and brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face, I didn't move. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a shiver racing down my spine. I closed my eyes for a moment, battling the storm inside me. When I opened them again, his face was closer, his breath mingling with mine. I whispered, "We shouldn't," but the weakness in my voice betrayed me. Even I didn't believe the protest. He leaned back slightly, giving me space, as though testing my resolve. "Then tell me to stop," he said simply, his voice low, steady. The words hung between us like a challenge. All I had to do was say them, and this moment would vanish, fade into a memory of temptation resisted. But my lips wouldn't form the words. Instead, silence stretched on, louder than any confession. My eyes met his again, and in them, I saw not just desire, but something deeper, loneliness, hunger, a reflection of my own hidden emptiness. He moved closer once more, slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to step away. But I didn't. My hands trembled as I finally let go of the illusion that I was in control. The tension was unbearable, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward meant to fall with no return. When his hand rested gently on my shoulder, I felt my defenses crumble. My body leaned into the warmth almost instinctively, as though it had been waiting for this moment far longer than I wanted to admit. My mind spun with guilt and fear, yet my heart raced with a dangerous exhilaration. It was madness, it was wrong, but it was real. I tried once more, weakly, to resist. "If anyone finds out," I whispered, the fear finally breaking through. He looked at me steadily, his expression calm but serious. "No one will," he replied softly, with a certainty that made me both terrified and comforted. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My silence was the only permission he needed, and we both knew it. As the minutes stretched on, the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer, as though trapping us in our secret. Every tick of the clock reminded me that this was happening, that I was surrendering to something I couldn't undo. My conscience continued to fight, but it was drowned out by the louder rhythm of my pulse, by the magnetic force that pulled me toward him no matter how much I tried to resist. When the distance between us finally dissolved, I knew there was no going back. The door was closed, the world outside forgotten. And though fear and guilt twisted inside me, I let the moment take me, knowing full well that it would change everything. This was no longer just temptation. It was the beginning of something forbidden, something I wasn't ready to name, but couldn't deny any longer. The world outside that closed door seemed to vanish. In its place was a silence, so thick it pressed against my ears, mingled with the quick, unsteady rhythm of my own breathing. His closeness no longer felt like suggestion. It was reality, undeniable, inescapable. I had crossed a line, and though every voice inside me screamed for retreat, my body betrayed me again, leaning into what I had secretly longed for. He reached for my hand, his touch firm yet careful, as if afraid I might pull away at the last moment. But I didn't. My fingers curled against his instinctively, and in that fragile contact, something inside me broke free. I felt a rush of warmth, of hunger, of release from the emptiness I had carried for so long. There were no words at first, just silence, heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. His eyes searched mine, as though asking for a final answer. I gave it in the only way I could, by not moving away when he drew closer. His lips brushed against mine with a gentleness that startled me, not forceful but questioning. And when I didn't resist, the kiss deepened, pulling me into a whirlpool of emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. It wasn't just passion, it was desperation, loneliness meeting loneliness in a collision that felt inevitable. Each moment stretched, blurred, became both wrong and achingly right. My heart pounded as if trying to break free from my chest, reminding me that I was alive, painfully, dangerously alive. For a fleeting second, I thought of my neighbor, his wife, my friend, and guilt stabbed me like a knife. But even as the thought surfaced, his touch drowned it out. Every stroke of his hand, every whisper of his breath, pulled me deeper into the moment, away from the world of rules and loyalty, into the dangerous intoxication of desire. Time lost its shape. Minutes felt like seconds or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The air was thick with secrets and the thrill of something forbidden. My conscience fought, but my body didn't listen. I surrendered, not out of ignorance, but out of a need I could no longer deny. Afterward, there was a stillness between us. My chest rose and fell with uneven breaths as I sat there, staring at the wall, unable to meet his eyes. The enormity of what had just happened settled over me like a storm cloud. I felt both exhilarated and terrified, consumed by a rush of emotions I couldn't name. He spoke first, his voice low but steady. "I've wanted this for so long." The honesty in his words cut through me. He wasn't playing a game. He wasn't treating this as a fleeting indulgence. There was weight in his confession, a truth I hadn't expected to hear. I turned to look at him, my lips parting as though to answer, but nothing came out. What could I say? That I had wanted it too? That I had dreamt of something like this in moments of weakness, even when I hated myself for it? My silence was answer enough. He leaned back against the bedpost, his eyes never leaving me. "We don't have to regret this," he whispered, almost pleading. "It doesn't have to mean anything beyond today." But I knew he was lying to himself. And so was I. Because deep inside, I felt something shift. It wasn't just desire that had brought me here. It was the craving to be seen, to be wanted, to feel alive again. And now that I had tasted it, I knew it would never be enough to walk away and pretend it hadn't happened. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering despite the warmth of the room. "It should have been just once," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He nodded, as though agreeing, but the look in his eyes betrayed him. We both knew it wouldn't stop here. The pull was too strong, the secret too intoxicating. Outside, a clock chimed softly, reminding me that the world was still moving beyond these four walls. That somewhere, his wife was living her day, unaware of the betrayal unraveling behind her back. Guilt washed over me again, sharp and suffocating, but it was tangled with a dangerous longing that refused to let go. As I stood to leave, his hand caught mine once more. "This isn't the end," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. I wanted to protest, to tell him we couldn't do this again. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw the same hunger mirrored back at me, the same weakness, the same desire. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that he was right. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something I should never have allowed, but now couldn't stop. The days that followed felt unreal, as if I were living in two worlds at once. In one, I carried on with my ordinary life, smiling at my neighbor, speaking to her as though nothing had changed, pretending to be the same person I had always been. In the other, I replayed every second of that afternoon in her husband's room, each stolen glance, each touch, each whispered word echoing in my mind like a secret I could never silence. I tried to bury it, to convince myself it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But denial was useless. Every time I saw him, whether across the garden or just passing by, the memory surged back with unbearable intensity. His eyes would catch mine for a split second, and in that silent exchange, everything came rushing back. The guilt, the hunger, the thrill, it was all there, burning between us, hidden in plain sight. I became restless, paranoid. Every sound felt like suspicion. Every question from my neighbor felt like a test. When she laughed and told me stories about her husband, I forced myself to laugh too, but inside, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. I wondered if she could see it in my eyes, if she noticed the way I shifted uncomfortably whenever his name came up. But he wasn't the same either. He had grown bolder. When we crossed paths alone, he would let his gaze linger a little too long, his words dipped in a subtle intimacy only I could recognize. Once, while no one was around, his hand brushed against mine, and though it lasted only a second, it sent shivers down my spine. He wasn't hiding the pull anymore, and neither was I. Late at night, I lay awake, torn apart by contradictions. I told myself I was strong enough to stop, that I could end this before it spiraled any further. But in the darkness, my heart betrayed me again and again. I wanted him. Not just his touch, but the way he made me feel alive, the way he looked at me as though I was the only person in the world who mattered. One afternoon, when I least expected it, it happened again. Another visit, another closed door, another surrender. This time, there was less hesitation, less resistance. The barrier had already been broken, and the danger only seemed to make it more intoxicating. When it was over, I promised myself for the 100th time that it had to end, that I couldn't keep risking everything. But even as I whispered those words to myself, I knew they were empty. The fear of being caught grew heavier each day. Every knock at the door, every unexpected visitor, every glance from my neighbor carried the threat of exposure. My nerves frayed under the weight of the secret. And yet, in some twisted way, the risk only made the desire stronger. It was a cycle I couldn't escape, guilt and temptation feeding each other until I was trapped in the middle. One evening, as I stood by my window, I saw him outside, his eyes finding mine in the fading light. He didn't smile, didn't gesture, didn't say a word. But in that single look, I knew what he meant. This wasn't over. It would never be over. Not until one of us had the strength to walk away, and neither of us seemed capable of that. I pressed my hand against the glass, a mix of fear and longing swirling inside me. What had I become? A thief of trust, a liar, a woman tangled in a web of her own choices. And yet, beneath all the shame, there was a part of me that didn't want to let go. That part whispered to me in the dark, reminding me of how it felt to be wanted, to be seen, to be alive. I knew the danger wasn't just about being caught. It was about losing myself, losing everything I thought I stood for. But still, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see the guilt. I saw him, waiting, pulling me back into the fire I couldn't resist. That day in his room hadn't been the end. It was only the beginning. And as much as I tried to fight it, deep inside, I already knew I would follow him again.